Hey, what's up? Let's talk about Mass Effect. And today I want to do a bit of a dive into an old thing, something that's been fun about being a newer fan to this older series, especially with them doing a remaster of the game, has been that I've missed a decade plus of drama and intrigue and interviews and various things. And I've really gotten into the conversation about what the next game will be like, what may happen or may not happen, or what can happen or what can't happen. And what's interesting to me is that most of what I base my thoughts off of are the remastered trilogy and playing through it almost 20 times, if not more, as well as the teasers we've gotten for the next game from N7 Day and other places for the last 3 years or so. But it's easy to forget that there's many years of content and interviews and stuff like that from before, especially around the time of the original trilogy releasing. So today I want to talk about a post that was on the BioWare forums back in 2012. This is an interview from PAX, I believe PAX West, from 2012 with Patrick Weeks, who's a writer who is still at BioWare, who I believe is currently working on Dragon Age Dreadwolf, and hopefully will stick around and work on the next Mass Effect. Patrick Weeks is responsible, I believe, for a lot of like Tally's arc, as well as many of the big moments, especially in Mass Effect 3. And I want to preface a bit as we look at this. So this was copy and pasted from the old BioWare social network, which was their forums. They shut down years ago. There is an archive on, I believe, Fextra Life. This is a copy and paste from that. So as far as I can tell from when I looked at the archive compared to this on this Reddit post, this all seems legit. This came to my attention because just a day or so ago, someone posted a summary of this, but I wanted to look at the actual, text from 2012, and we can kind of go through it and talk about all of the points made. Something to point out is that from this original, interview, quote unquote, from back in 2012, they make very clear that this is not a word for word recollection of the interview. They say in here that they paraphrase Patrick's answers, that these are not direct quotes, even though it seems like some of them are. So let's dive into it, and we're going to be looking at this as from a perspective of what some of these things may mean for the next game, because when I was going through this, some of the things said, I haven't heard part of the more modern conversation about the next game, even though I would assume these are things that were basically being set in stone for the next game. So the first question was, is there still a setting to explore after the ending? Is everything ruined? The paraphrased answer from Patrick Weeks was, the setting is definitely not ruined. We still have a big, lively galaxy. I've seen some of this conversation like, well, if all the relays are destroyed and no one can go anywhere and everything's going to fall apart and the Reapers destroyed everything before they even ended the war. I personally was never under that impression, but you definitely see fans talk about this. One thing to keep in mind about this interview is I get the impression that it took place after Mass Effect 3 released, but before the extended cut. And so this was a tumultuous time for BioWare, probably for Patrick and for that entire team. And so some of the answers you have to keep in mind were given before the extended cut came out and kind of tied up more loose ends and gave a little more satisfying endings to more people. The next question was, will long distance superluminal travel still be possible post ending? Will Tally or Rex or Garrus ever see their homeworlds again? Will everyone starve? If you don't understand the starving thing, there's a lot of talk about, well, if all of these fleets were in the Sol system, in the Milky, in Earth's orbit, and they defeat the Reapers, but now no one can leave because the mass relays are destroyed, especially if it's the destroy ending, are they all just gonna starve in around the Earth, or are they going to invade? Like, what's gonna happen? The paraphrase answer here from Patrick was galactic civilization will rebuild. The mass relays were not necessary for interstellar flight. Remember, what does it say in the codex about the speed of ships? That's right, 12 light years per, and they didn't really they weren't really sure what per day, per hour, per minute, and that's only the cruising speed, not the maximum speed. People have never needed to research basic FTL improvements before because they have mass relays. With the relays gone, new technology will increase that speed. Additionally, the element zero cores of the dead controlled Reapers can be used to improve FTL drives. Starflight will continue using conventional FTL. And so this seems like they've put, that Patrick and others likely on the writing team at this time had put a lot of thought into, the relays are gone, but it's an inconvenience and not something that's going to destroy everything. You even see in the extended cut, at least, that after the battle's over, many in the epilogue, especially in the destroy ending, you see all of the fleets just kind of taken off into space. And so, yes, I think the idea is that with the mass relays gone, they won't be able to travel instantly to other places, but that they could get back to their prospective homeworlds in a reasonable amount of time, not hundreds of years or maybe even multiple years, but I'm not going to get into all of that. This does play into what we've seen in some of the more recent teasers as well. In 2022, we had the picture of what appears to be a newly constructed or in construction mass relay that may have human origin or whatever. And you saw a bunch of these ships that were in a similar shape as the Andromeda Initiative ship, the Nexus and all of the smaller ships around it. They were using an experimental FTL drive and a drive system to get them to the Andromeda system much faster. The 600 years was considered a lot faster than the alternative. And so what I would assume is kind of what Patrick said in this response was, due to the need for innovation, you would probably see FTL travel get better. I've always had the opinion too that it wouldn't surprise me at all if the relays, from a lore perspective, get repaired much quicker than we think they would. It's not like they got completely destroyed, exploded, like in the Arrival DLC, but and then the last thing I'll say about that is that I've always assumed that there's keepers on the relays, and we know, how effective they are at maintaining the Citadel. I would imagine they would be similarly good at repairing the relays, but that's purely headcanon. Next question, why did Joker leave Shep behind? The answer, Joker would never abandon Shep without good reason. Hopefully that will be clear in the expanded cut. So this is one of your indications of, what happened, this was an interim thing, and we do see, Joker struggle over leaving Shepard behind. What they don't mention here is that there is always the possibility that Shepard survived despite being left by his pilot. Next question, why can't Edie survive the destroy ending? We argued a lot about this, was the answer. I said that she was made of Reaper tech and should therefore be destroyed, but unclear, don't remember, wish I'd been able to ask follow-up on his response. It doesn't make much sense. So it sounds like this was kind of a question lost to time. Did anyone on the Citadel survive? Yes, we would never ever do anything that would make the player feel on replay that it would be better for everyone on the Citadel if they just died. The Citadel has emergency shelters and kinetic barriers. Even if it blows up, millions might survive. You should assume that everyone plot important on the Citadel survived. That's a big deal. Like if Patrick, if this was things that their team, that writing team and all of that decided, and talked about these things and decided these are facts, like, we are saying, we are moving forward one day, even if it's 15 years later, with these ideas. If this is true, and hopefully if the next game, hopefully for me, takes place relatively short after Mass Effect 3, it means that we could, see a lot of old friends. Is it better for Kelly Chambers if we talk her into, not staying alive? No, see above. That was a weird question. That must have been more of a question of the time, because I don't know why that would ever seem like the better option. The next question: who wrote the death of Joker's sister? The answer: I did. We intentionally did not connect the dots. We were very interested to see how fast gamers figured it out. This is in reference to in Mass Effect 3 and the Huerta Memorial Hospital. If you, on your subsequent visits, on your mini visits to see Ashley or Kaidan after they're injured and to do some side questy stuff, you will notice that there's two Asari talking. And long story short, you find out that one of them was an Asari commando who was on the home planet of Joker, I forget what it's called, and ran into a girl who is obviously described as Joker's sister. After a bunch of bad stuff happens, the commando tries to save her and help her escape. And long story short, she ends up having to leave his sister behind, who subsequently dies or is killed during this event. And we there's never an opportunity to tell Joker. The very dark, awful part of me always thought that when Joker's getting all high and mighty during a later part of the game, I wish there was a renegade way to, if you heard this conversation play out, tell Joker about what happened to his sister. I know that seems cruel and awful, but I just think that would have been interesting. Next question: whose idea was it to make Raya fall out of the sky if you destroy the Quarian fleet? It was someone in the audio department was the answer. It was brilliant. I would never allow that to happen in my playthroughs, but I have seen videos of, if you pick the Geth over the Quarians, what it looks like when all their ships crash down to the ground after being attacked by the Geth, and it's pretty heartbreaking. So I would agree, it was brilliant. Next question: did the mass relays pull an arrival and go supernova? Patrick responded, paraphrased, no, they didn't. They overloaded. They did not rupture. We really didn't mean to imply the whole galaxy had been destroyed. People interpreted the ending in ways we didn't expect. Mr. Weeks dropped a lot of hints that he really didn't like the ending. He also had said something that was almost 100% verbatim from the Penny Arcade forum that is often assumed to be him, but that was technically anonymous. And so I never thought this, because I never felt like it was really shown that it was more that the Reapers got or the mass relays got overloaded and kind of broke apart, but that they didn't explode the way that the relay does in Arrival after it's hit by an asteroid. And so I guess if people back then thought that every single mass relay blew up the way it did in Arrival, then yeah, everything would be wiped out. But that wasn't the case. I never thought it was, and it seems like way back when that was confirmed. Why did Legion pull a 180 from his Mass Effect 2 philosophy? He and the Geth were backed into a corner. They had been made a lot dumber by the attack on the Dyson Swarm, and there was no other choice for Geth survival. The Dyson Swarm is something that only gets kind of referenced quickly in the games, but it was basically this big giant supercomputer for the Geth that was destroyed by, I believe, the Quarians, and it did deal a pretty significant blow to their compute power. And so using that as an excuse for why they completely changed their philosophy is, in my opinion, kind of lazy. I really hate the way that Mass Effect 1 and 2 kind of paints the Quarian Geth issue as a kind of a gray area where they both don't, they're kind of both wrong, they're kind of both right. I personally have always hated how Mass Effect 3 basically tries to force the player into thinking that the Geth are the good guys, the Quarians are the bad guys, through some really, really, in my opinion, pushy narrative stuff. But at least there is some kind of answer from Patrick. What was up with the Rachni story? Did we get railroaded? Welcome to game development, Patrick said. In some games, Alpha Protocol, they made a bold choice where some decisions can knock entire missions out of the story. At BioWare, we never want people to be locked out of content due to the decision several games ago. we just didn't have the resources to do an alternative for the Rachni mission, so we decided the Rachni mission could occur whether or not players save the queen. This is in reference to the fact that no matter what you do in Mass Effect 1, whether you save the Rachni queen or kill her, she still appears in the third game. Either if you saved her, it's the same Rachni queen you saved. If you kill her, the whole thing is that the Cerberus cloned her and made her, and then the Reapers caught her and used her. It's super lame. Why didn't ex squad mate from Mass Effect 2 return? There was a very ugly month of development where we fought out who would return. We knew we would have a smaller cast so we could fit in more squad banter. Eventually we decided to bring Garrus and Tali back so they could be squad mates in all 3 games. We also knew we'd have Vega in order for new players to have someone dumber than they were. I was very resentful of Vega at first because I thought he was taking a slot that could have gone to a Mass Effect 2 character, but he grew on me. Question: why did EDI have a camel toe? Answer: we didn't get a lot of feedback from the art department, but and then it says that he doesn't remember the full answer. Lots of discussion about how he was uncomfortable doing Pinocchio stories from both Legion and EDI because EDI was fine, she was AI, she was cool. Do we really need her to turn into Commander Data from Star Trek? We had 7 seasons of Data. That was enough. Yeah, this is something that I've even pointed out, that I understand that EDI was supposed to be like an infiltration bot and was like needs to be anatomically correct or whatever because she needed to pass as a human. But yeah, to me, it just seems like it's kind of old school, overly horny gamer stuff. It's so, it seems like it was a nice explanation for that, I guess. Let's skip the Pinocchio one there. What was up with the Human Reaper in Mass Effect 2? Why did it look so dumb? We wanted to use the suicide mission, here's the answer, to show several steps in the Reaper development process, from Human Reaper embryo all the way to the cuttlefish, but the mission grew too complicated, so that was cut for time. And I've always hated the Human Reaper thing at the end of Mass Effect 2, but I've gotten over it. Arrival's the true ending anyways. Do the Reapers really only generate 1 capital ship per cycle? How do they ever break even? The answer, well, they never really pin that down, but the cycle was really anomalous. They don't normally take any capital size Reaper losses at all. So yeah, this is the kind of implication, even though I swear that some of the derelict Reapers that we interact with that were killed in previous cycles are capital ships, but maybe they weren't. But the whole thing of this cycle is different. We're killing Reaper ships all over the place where that probably didn't happen before. Question: what was up with Kai Lang? How do you feel about him? Answer: we really wanted to have a recurring antagonist for Shep, a Darth Maul, but I feel like there was some definite conflict between cutscene and gameplay there, and I think it's something we have to work on. He was a great antagonist in the books. Yeah, I mean, Kai Lang is probably one of the most hated antagonists in the entire series, mostly because they just kind of pop out of nowhere, and we're just supposed to be like, oh yes, this recurring antagonist, even though there weren't like a handful of other people who definitely could have been used in this role. It had to be some random person who was like in the books. So, even 11 years later, it seems like people still have a similar feeling there. Why did we only get top and bottom dialogue choices, no middle? Part of it was resources. This is the answer. Part of it was that Mass Effect 3 is a war story, and it's really hard for Shep to feel middling about the Reapers. And so this is a pretty common thing I've seen, where in Mass Effect 1 and 2, you have the Renegade, the Paragon, and then you often had like kind of a middle ground answer in a lot of situations. And then in Mass Effect 3, it becomes very Paragon Renegade only to the extreme, and it seems like it was probably mostly a resource issue, but as by the time the third game came out, the potential differences and answers and all that and situations were so sprawling that it shouldn't be that surprising that they kind of tried to simplify 3. How did you feel about the ending? They specify that they didn't actually ask this, but they wish they would have, basically. They asked why no female aliens. Patrick responded resource limitations. They have a very strict budget for how many different characters they can use in a given area. Some are basically free. If you have a human males, you have Batarians because they're humans with funny heads. If you have human females, you have Asari for the same reason. Yeah, this is something that people, especially in hindsight, forget, is that all three of the Mass Effect games came out in the same generation of consoles. Mass Effect 1 was exclusive to Xbox 360, and then Mass Effect 2 and 3 came out on PS3 and 360, and then eventually in like a complete edition or something, Mass Effect 1 came out on PlayStation 3 as well. And that's why you saw the scale of, Mass Effect 1 is a huge game with large areas, and like the Citadel is huge and all that, but it's very low detail. Well, by Mass Effect 3, it's pretty high detailed. It actually still looks pretty good, but they had to make everything smaller because they weren't dealing with any more power. So, by Mass Effect 3, that's why in Mass Effect 3, you can't put your gun away. I remember reading something about how adding that animation and stuff would have put them over the RAM limit of the consoles of that time, as well as you had to keep in mind they had to put these games on disc, and so they had to think about that as well when they were making games. And sure, you can do multiple disc games, but that was not ideal at the time. And so when it comes to adding in more variety of aliens, even having each gender of the species that we were already aware of, it wasn't possible. I've also been under the impression that that's why I believe it's acknowledged at some point that there are like dozens of alien species in the known universe, but we just never see most of them because they just literally couldn't afford to put them in the game. So that gives a lot of hope for the future that maybe we'll see more of that at another time. Question: where was Harbinger? Can we assume direct control of him? The answer: I definitely want more closure on Harbinger. That'd be hilarious. Stop punching yourself, Harbinger. How did the Reapers storm the Citadel? Why didn't they shut down the relays as per the original plan once they had control? Originally, we planned to have a cutscene of Reapers taking over, Reaper monsters punching buttons, etc. But we cut it, partially for resource reasons, and partly because it disrupted the pacing. The Reapers didn't shut down the mass relays because the Keepers interfered with that. I wish I could have asked a follow-up question here. It didn't make much sense. Yeah, I mean, we know that they had kind of, from Mass Effect 1, we know that the Keepers had kind of been disconnected from the Reapers to not do their bidding. And so I guess the implication here is that they were still basically getting in the way of the Reapers, even after they took over the Citadel, to prevent things from happening there. Why don't Ken and Gabby have more dialogue? I assume this is for Mass Effect 3. They actually have a bunch more on disc, but somehow introduced a bug where their dialogue is tied to your approval level with Ash. If Ash has low approval or isn't present, most of Ken and Gabby's dialogue won't play. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Why do you guys Star Wars cycle space battles instead of the battles described in the Codex? We want to provide a familiar, compelling visual experience for people who grew on Star Wars and stuff like that. These are some of my favorite parts of the game. And then they have some things they wish they asked. So again, remember, this is all from 11 plus years ago. Lots of things have changed. All of this may not hold up, but when talking about like the relays and stuff like that, I think this is interesting because you see people having conversations now that seem to ignore a lot of the information that you will have gathered from this particular interview in chat, and I think that's interesting. I think it's worth including in the current conversation, especially as we approach another N7 day where we're probably going to get a bunch more teasers. I'm not expecting to get the world with this N7 day, with Dreadwolf still not being out. I really think we aren't going to get a ton of info until Dragon Age Dreadwolf releases and until we find out the game is actually in production, which assumes that most of the big things have been decided by then. But every year we've gotten a lot more than I expected, considering how far out the next Mass Effect game is. And so it'll be fun to take some of this information, everything we've learned over the last few years, and whatever we find out in November, and do a little more speculation and talk about it. So that's that. Speaking of N7 Day, please keep an eye out. I am doing a big giveaway that includes a bunch of Mass Effect merch. I'm gonna pick 3 winners this year, and it's going to include a copy of the game on your platform of choice, either for you or maybe you can gift the gift of Mass Effect to someone else. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you want more Mass Effect or just gaming news and speculation in general, please subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment down below with what you thought of all of this stuff, what you want from the next game, or you can just say hello. I am Bon Diesel all over the internet. You can catch me on Twitter and Threads and Blue Sky, and you can catch me over on Twitch, where I do try to stream at least a couple times a week, and we can chat about some of this stuff live. And I have a weekly gaming news podcast called the Bonfire Podcast. You can catch that on all podcast platforms and right here on this YouTube. And I am always taking questions and topics from the audience. So if you want a person to talk about things that you want to know more about, my podcast is the place to go. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.